Hello Year 10. This is your lesson for Triple Science Biology on Thursday the 21st of January. Now this work is not in your booklet. I did organise for a blank exercise book to be sent out to you because we've come to almost the end of this topic. This is the last little section on eutrophication, which we'll explain what that is in a second. And then I will be setting you some extension tasks, some practice GCSE questions before we go on to the next topic booklet, okay, which is to do with the heart and circulatory system and diseases, okay, which also comes up in some of the double work later on. So for today, if you can have the blank exercise book in front of you, and we'll be using this for some of our extension tasks. So can you put today's date, Thursday the 21st of January, on the top line? And the heading is eutrophication, so it's here. Here's our spelling, okay, on the board. And our objective is, what is eutrophication? What does this big, long, complicated word actually mean? So your starter activity to begin with is to match up the names of these common farm used chemicals, okay, with their uses. So I'd like you to pause the video, okay, and write down the names of the three chemicals and match them to their correct use. Thank you. So hopefully you've completed that, and you should know from the work that we've been doing on the nitrogen cycle that fertilizers, okay, contain quite a lot of nitrogen, okay, in them. Sometimes phosphate, sometimes potassium. We call those the NPK fertilizer. Now, a bit of crossover with chemistry. N is the element's symbol is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and K is potassium. So if you see that written on bags around farms, it's normally an NPK fertilizer, okay? So it provides a source of nutrients to help plants to grow. Herbicides kill any weeds. They don't kill just herbs, okay? I know that word is sometimes a bit deceptive. So it kills any weeds, and weeds are going to prevent the farmers' crops from growing because they're going to be competing for space, for water, for light, okay? And they might outcompete the crop that's growing in the field if they're particularly fast growing weed, so the farmer is unable to make a maximum crop size. And this last one, sometimes called pesticide, sometimes called an insecticide. They kill insects, okay, that might feed on the plant and damage its growth and appearance, thereby reducing the crop size again for farmers, okay. So if you're an organic farmer, you will not be using any of these types of chemicals. You may, however, be using an organic type of fertilizer, and have a little think about what that organic type of fertilizer is. So it's normally some kind of manure. It can be in and around the Pontedillice area. I know sometimes we can smell it. It's cow manure, okay, being spread on the fields, okay, we call it muck spreading. Sometimes they use chicken manure as well, okay, is a common one that is used. So an organic farmer would not be using any artificial herbicides, pesticides, any artificial fertilizers. They would only be using purely organic. So, new page in your book then, okay, there are millions more people in the world now than there were over 200 years ago. And this creates a problem, because if there are millions more people, they need more resources, both food, both space, accommodation, habitat to live in, okay? And along with needing these resources, okay, they also produce more waste, okay? So if we've got more people, we need to produce more food for them, okay? So I want you to just think about one positive point about farmers using chemicals like fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides to grow food for the growing population, one negative point about them using these chemicals, and one interesting point about farmers. So I only want a sentence, okay? And you can write them down as bullet points. So you can start off with your positive. Yeah, so you can give it a plus sign. You can then do your negative, and you can give it a minus sign. and then you can do your interesting point. We'll give it an exclamation mark, okay? So just from your own perspective, what you know, positive, negative, and interesting points about chemicals that farming communities may use. Pause the video. So one of the problems with using all of these chemicals is that sometimes our water systems can end up looking like this. So these young girls are actually floating in a water area, a lake or a stream. This gentleman is swimming. This guy, this is not land, okay? He's not just covered himself in a load of plants, okay? He's actually in water. And you can see what's happened here is we've got what they call algal blooms. Now, even though these algal blooms can look quite fun potentially to swim in, okay, swimming in a load of like slimy, greeny, gunky stuff, they are not good for water systems. You may sometimes have seen this happening in parks. So sometimes you get like the pond in a park will go really green and sludgy. Sometimes you see it in marinas. For example, in Swansea Marina, they've had an issue with this in the past. And you might even see it around local streams and areas like that. The time of year when we tend to see this happening is the summer. And if you have a little think about why that might be, it's because obviously there's plenty of light and there's a warmer temperature in the air than there is during the winter, okay? And the other thing that causes this is the extra nutrients that these farmers have added, whether they've been washed in unintentionally, okay, whether there's pollution from other areas, it causes these algal blooms. And you might think, well, there's nothing wrong with them, they'll die back and everything will be fine. But they do have a massive impact, okay, on the environment. And so we've seen this in the past in Swansea itself. I can remember many years ago, they shut off one of the parks, okay, that I think it was Bryn Mawr Park, the one with the pond in it, because they had a very hot summer. You get a lot of ducks and geese, okay, and different fowl, different birds, okay, that live on the pond. And obviously these birds, they all excrete. There's lots of bird poop about, and bird poop contains an awful lot of nutrients, okay, just like any sewage, any waste does, any slurry off of farms. And it caused the algae, tiny microscopic green plants that live in the waterways, okay, to start to multiply out of control because of the extra light and the warm temperatures and these extra nutrients. And as a result, okay, the algae that bloomed, particularly in this park in this particular year, was toxic. And the way they found out was somebody had been walking their dog around the pond, and the dog decided he was going to drink some of the water from the pond. And unfortunately, the dog did pass away, okay, was poisoned by these algae. So they had to shut the pond for a while. Same thing has happened in Swansea Marina. They've had blooms of algae. The algae growing massively. And again, always in the summer, okay. So is it just farming communities and the chemicals that they use that cause this? Well, no, okay? Anything that adds nitrates and phosphates to the water will have the same effect. So any sewage that escapes from a sewage pipe, any slurry from farms, what we mean by slurry is, you know, that horrible almost liquid cow poo, okay, that is then used sometimes, okay, to put onto crops to help them grow as an organic farmer. If there's excess slurry washes into rivers and streams, it will cause this problem. Industrial and domestic detergents, a lot of detergents contain phosphates, okay? So washing powders and washing up liquid and industrial detergents as well. And other pollutants from industry and households will have this same effect. So the whole effect is called eutrophication. And it is this blooming of algae, okay, in waterways. But there is a sequence of steps that happens to cause this, okay, and then we've still yet to discuss the impact of it on the environment. So, I would want you to copy down, first of all, okay, the statements from this. Sewage, industrial waste, oil, pesticides and fertilizers all pollute the water. And it's these fertilizers and sewage mainly that get washed into the rivers, streams and lakes. And the nutrients, the phosphates and the nitrates, cause eutrophication. So the definition of eutrophication is the accumulation of nutrients in water, which causes excessive algal growth, and this leads to a reduction in oxygen levels and the death of aquatic life. So we can see this is very fine filaments of algae growing here. So pause the video, write a side heading water pollution, and can you copy these 3 short paragraphs into your book for me, please? So hopefully you've done that. We're now going to do a little sketch, okay, to show exactly what's happening. So here we've got our nitrogen and phosphorus going into the water. Now it's very rare that the nitrogen and phosphorus goes in just as an element. They normally go in as nitrates, chemicals that have nitrogen in them, and phosphates, in other words, chemicals that have phosphates in them. So what these nutrients do is, just like in a fertilizer, they cause the plant to grow more, so the farmer can grow more crops. They also cause an increase in what we call the phytoplankton. So plankton are small microscopic organisms that live in water, and phytoplankton, okay, contain a green pigment, carry out photosynthesis, okay, and are technically plants. So they cause the phytoplankton to grow massively. Now, as they grow massively, they create a bloom, an algal bloom or algae bloom here. This algal bloom stops the light getting down to the algae underneath the bloom. So where you've got almost like this massive blanket of algae growing on the surface, the ones underneath, these ones, can't get any light. And so because they're a plant, they start to die. Now, what happens when we have death of an organism, okay, is you get decay. So when algae die, they decay. And we know that microorganisms cause decay, bacteria and fungi, okay, but mainly bacteria in this case. The microorganisms carry out respiration and use up the oxygen in decay. As a result, the oxygen level starts to get depleted. And because the oxygen level gets depleted, we say that the river starts to die. Because the river dies, we get lots of dead fish floating on the surface. So fish are not supposed to be on the surface. So sometimes you can actually see this if there is a river that has been affected by eutrophication, okay. Occasionally you will see fish floating on the surface, okay, dead, and all the other organisms that live in the river will die too. So eutrophication really is the death of a river ecosystem or some kind of waterway, a pond, okay. So when this happened in Bryn Mill Park, okay, obviously the algae that were blooming were also toxic, so it created a second problem. It created the toxins from the bacteria entering the food chain, namely into the dog in this particular case, okay. But also you can have the eutrophication, the death of the river. You can see the fish lying on the surface dead. So Swansea Marina, the case when they had it there, okay, the fish were just dying and floating on the surface. And that's normally when Welsh Water and the Environment Agency start to get involved, and they go down and they'll take water samples and they will check on the level of algae in the water, they will check on the level of bacteria in the water, and they'll be looking for toxins, okay? So my husband used to work for the Environment Agency, and this was one of his jobs, to go and collect water from various different sites to check that the rivers were healthy, the ecosystems were healthy, and we didn't have eutrophication occurring and death of our waterways. So I'd like you to pause the video. I'd like you to do your own little sketch, okay? to show what's actually happening during eutrophication, and you can use some of the words that I've put onto that diagram to help you. So pause the video. So just to show you a kind of flow chart of the sequence of events, okay, because this comes up as often a really good what we call QWC, extended writing answer, okay, because not only is it about the quality of the extended response, it's about sequencing of the events that happen in the correct order. So we know that overuse of nitrogenous fertilizers, what we call the NPK fertilizers, can harm the environment, and lakes and rivers can suffer from this term eutrophication. So if a fertilizer gets washed into a lake or river because there's been excess use of it, and perhaps we've had a lot of rain like we've had recently and are likely to have for the next couple of days, this makes the algae grow faster. Some of the plants are shaded by the algae that live in the river normally, so some of the plants die, along with the algae underneath, okay? So where the blanket of algae is on the top, the algae that are underneath also die. So you've got algae dying, you've got plants dying. Both the dead algae and the plants are decomposed by microbes, so we've already covered decomposition at the start of the booklet. The microbes carry out respiration, key word. They use up the oxygen, dissolved oxygen levels start to fall, so they drop, and as a result aquatic animals will suffocate and die, and that is the whole process is eutrophication, the death of the river. So again, in your exercise books, can you copy this down as a flow chart? Okay, take a whole page to do it. Okay, you don't have to draw the upside down dead fish at the bottom, but if you want to help you remember, then by all means do. Pause the video. So I've got some statements here at the moment, okay? These statements are not currently in the right order. So even though the fish here say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they are not in the correct order. So I want you to have a look at these statements and I want you to see if you can write them in the correct order, please. Pause the video, write them in the correct order, and I will go over these with you. So hopefully you've got our fish number 5 statement. That should be our number 1. Fertilizers and liquid nutrients wash into the water. Our statement number 2 is algae starts to grow rapidly, blocking out the light. That's our fish number 3. Statement number 3 is the plants below the surface of the water die because they've got lack of sunlight. So that's our fish number 2. Statement number 4, the oxygen levels drop as microbes feed on dead plants, and obviously they would carry out respiration using up the oxygen. That's fish number 1. And the final one, statement number 5, is fish and invertebrates will die from lack of oxygen. So that's our fish number 4 here. Check you've got them in the right order and give yourself a score out of 5 for me, please. So this is leading on to the last task of lesson 1, of the first lesson of your double lesson, okay? You've got a choice of how you want to do this extended writing, okay? You can either do it as a letter, you can either do it as like a storyboard or comic strip, okay? So it still needs some wording in there, or you can write it as a news article. I'm going to leave it completely up to you. The choice is yours. So if you're doing the letter one, I'm going to explain all of these, what we expect in the letter, and I'll show you in the PowerPoint so that you can give yourself an opportunity to pause the video and make sure that you're including those things, the success criteria, in your task. So if you're doing the letter, I want you to write the letter to a farmer, explaining the effect that their chemicals are having on the nearby lake. If you're doing the storyboard or the comic strip, You can either print off the page that you will see in the PowerPoint, okay, to be able to draw your comic strip, or you can design your own. It's really up to you. And if you want to do it using the computer, that's absolutely fine as well. And I want the comic strip to explain the process of eutrophication. So there might be lots of dead fish floating on the surface of your stream or whatever towards the end. And then we've got a news article on how eutrophication is affecting the environment and what could be done to prevent the damage. Okay, so from a proactive, preventative point of view for your news article. So, success criteria for your letter to the farmer. In your letter, can you include to explain to the farmer what effect the fertilizers are having on, or the fertilizers they're using on their crops are having on the nearby lake, to describe what eutrophication is, and I do want the detail in there, and to empathise with the farmer by explaining why you think they need to use the fertilizers in the first place, okay? And perhaps suggesting alternative farming methods like organic farming, okay? But make sure that you do this sympathetically, empathising with the farmer, thank you. If you've chosen to do the comic strip, okay, obviously just make sure that you've got a grid. It doesn't have to have 4x4. It doesn't have to go all the way up to 16. You can choose to do whatever you like, okay? And as I said, that comic strip has to explain the process of eutrophication, okay? Almost like, I suppose, if you were designing a cartoon for an animation on eutrophication, you would have this. And I did try to use one, but unfortunately Flash has now been disabled. We're unable to show you that anymore. The third task, if you decide to do this one instead, okay, is the news article. I want you to explain how eutrophication has become a major problem for the environment now, to give me an example of the effects of eutrophication, to explain how the increasing population has led to farmers using more fertilizers, and suggest a way we can reduce the damage on the environment, okay? So this is just a different slant really on your letter to the farmer, okay, but more of a news article. So you can rewind this video, pause it at the task that you want to do, and that's your task to complete, okay, for the end of lesson 1. Thank you very much, Year 10.